Welcome back to the Texas News Podcast, where we dive into all things Texas politics and the future of independence in the state of Texas. On today's show, we're going to explore a concept that's been a cornerstone of our strategy in the Texas nationalist movement. It's called the tipping point. We're also going to dig into what it means to have an unshakable belief in Texas independence and how to know if you are a part of the tipping point. So don't go anywhere. Well, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Texas News Podcast. And this one is one that, for me, is always exciting to do because we get to talk about something that is really key to making TEXIT happen, but really not known for a lot, or not known to a lot of people. There are a lot of folks out there that have somewhat of a perception of the way things should be and maybe what we're doing or what they think we're not doing. In fact, one of my favorite things to see on social media is when people say, have you really thought about this? Have you really thought this through? I have to laugh. I didn't used to laugh. It used to kind of upset me a bit, make me angry because we do nothing but think about this because we constantly, 24/7, 365, work to make it happen. However, there are some folks out there that they don't understand the strategy, and a lot of it deals with misconceptions about what the process is to get independence, right? They thought that, they once watched a 40-minute documentary on the History Channel, and so suddenly they're experts on this, and I know that that's not those of you that are listening right now, because let's face it, because you're here listening, you're a cut above, right? But one of the things that I think people don't really understand is how much we've really broken this down and broken down the strategy for how to achieve independence. And look, I'm going to tell you, a lot of what I'm talking about today is not Texas specific. In fact, it has applications in other self-determination movements. It has applications in the business world, especially since this is where a good bit of this information came from. And so let's just get down to the brass tacks, right? Let's talk about the tipping point. Now, if you've been around the T&M for any substantial length of time, you probably have heard a mention of the issue of the tipping point, right? It was, I believe I mentioned it in the TEXIT book. We've talked about it in some leadership trainings. And as a matter of fact, it is a central component, or not a central component, but a key component of the seminars that we're giving around the state right now called the TEXIT Blueprint. And there are some fundamentals that we deal with that really impact our strategy and how we operate here in the T&M. And tipping point theory is one of them. So many of you may have heard this term outside of the T&M. People use it colloquially. They talk about things have reached a tipping point, and it just sort of has become part of the popular vernacular. But a lot of people don't stop and think about what the tipping point really means. Now, there are some books out there. I believe Malcolm Gladwell had a book about this. There are a lot of, I think, business writers out there that have attacked this issue of the tipping point, and a lot of what they do is based anecdotally, right? And I'm okay with anecdotes, but I like some data to go along with them. And so I want you to understand that if you have previously read any of those popular works about the tipping point, it may not be the same conceptualization that we are using. So it's important that you kind of follow me throughout this particular podcast episode, because there are some key things that you're going to need to understand as to how the tipping point applies to us achieving our goal of a free and independent, self-governing nation of Texas. So to begin with, our idea of a tipping point actually comes from a study that was conducted by scientists at RPI. Okay, now this study, I believe it came out in 2010, and it is something that we've talked about quite a bit within the T&M. But I think before we get to what really is the core of today's episode, I think you have to understand what the tipping point is. We have to revisit it because really and truly, it does serve as a foundation for a lot of the work that we do. So in this study, these scientists at the Social Cognitive Networks school, whatever it is there at RPI, what they did was they wanted to discover when social networks, not in the terms of, say, a Facebook or an X or something like that, but our everyday interactions in society. They wanted to determine at what point does an idea spread like wildfire, and at what point are you going to get almost guaranteed adoption of a particular idea? You take a particular idea and it may be held by a small number of people, and then you look around and a decade later, everybody thinks that that's the truth, right? Everybody believes that way. And so they ran a ton of computer modeling, right? And what they discovered is really both simple and profound. It's that when approximately 10% of a population holds an unshakable belief, that belief inevitably spreads to the majority. Okay? Now I want you to think about that for a moment. It means that once a small but determined group reaches a critical mass, their ideas can no longer be ignored. Instead, they begin to influence and eventually dominate the wider society. You see, that's what the study determined was the tipping point. Okay? So think about that. And I'm using terminology that they used. To repeat, when approximately 10% of a population holds an unshakable belief, that belief inevitably spreads to the majority. So effectively, what they are saying is that if you want to be able to identify the tipping point, you've just got to look and see, okay, here's a population, here is a particular unshakable belief, and when that number of people holding that unshakable belief hits 10% of the population, eventually, whatever that time period will be or may be, that population will also, a majority will hold that unshakable belief. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating study. And before anyone throws the critique up there that this is just a one-off study, understand that there have been many others. In fact, the very same group of scientists at RPI recently ran one dealing with the issue of polarization in governing bodies and examining if there was, in fact, a tipping point there, depending on the level of polarization. So you've had studies that have backed up the RPI findings, plus you've had subsequent work by RPI to refine this model, and invariably it pans out. But the question I'm sure you're asking is, how does this relate to TEXIT? Well, look, I'm sure you can see how it relates to TEXIT, right? Remember, for Texas to become a self-governing independent nation, we have to have a majority of Texas voters that are willing to commit to voting for that to happen. And you have to understand, our goal isn't just to convince a few people here and there. We're working to build a committed core of Texans who believe deeply and unwaveringly in the necessity of Texas becoming an independent nation. This tells you that we're not looking for passive supporters. I think we've communicated that very clearly. We're looking for people who are so convinced of our cause that nothing can shake their belief. And once we reach that critical mass, that 10% tipping point, the movement for TEXIT will spread across Texas like wildfire. Okay? Now, you may be wondering, why 10%? Why not 50% or 75% as our target? Well, the research shows that at 10%, a belief is not just an idea held by a small group. It becomes a movement, eventually, that is difficult, if not impossible, to suppress. the momentum shifts at the tipping point, and suddenly what previously seemed impossible begins to look inevitable. Now, the tipping point concept is absolutely central to our strategy in the T&M. We're not trying to appeal to everyone at once. Instead, we're focused on building that solid foundation of committed supporters who are ready to advocate, educate, and take action for Texas independence. Once we have that core, the tipping point will absolutely do the rest. Okay, so now think about the implications of this. If we can reach and activate just 10% of Texans to hold this unshakable belief in TEXIT, it will create a ripple effect. It'll influence their families, their friends, their coworkers, and their communities. And before long, TEXIT won't just be a possibility. It will be the prevailing sentiment across the state. You see, folks, that is the power of the tipping point. You know, it's not just a theory. It's a roadmap. We've seen it happen in other movements throughout history. From the civil rights movement to independence movements across the world, the tipping point is a proven phenomenon. And right now, we are closer than ever to reaching that point here in Texas. So as you listen to the rest of the episode, I want you to keep that number in mind, 10%. It's not as far off as it might seem, and with your help, we can absolutely get there. But before we move into the next segment and talk about and really break down the tipping point and its application to TEXIT, we've got to address an elephant in the room. If you've been following the polling or you've been listening to this podcast, you're probably already thinking, wait a minute, well, aren't we already there? I mean, haven't we already hit the tipping point? I mean, after all, polling data shows that support for TEXIT is above 50%, with some polls showing it as high as 66% among likely voters. So does that mean that we've already crossed the tipping point threshold? Well, not quite, and here's why. While it's true that polling numbers are an important indicator of where public sentiment is, they really don't tell the whole story. Polls measure opinions at a specific point in time. They're meant to just capture how people feel in that moment. But if you'll recall, as I was going through and talking about the tipping point, I kept using this term, unshakable belief, right? Unshakable belief is something much deeper than just how you feel at the very moment a poll is asked, right? Unshakable belief is something that is very, very different than, well, I woke up this morning and I'm angry at the federal government, and so I will vote for TEXIT, but tomorrow, maybe I see some positive news and, suddenly I'm back on, Team Fed, right? Unshakable belief is very different. It's not just about agreeing with the idea of TEXIT when asked in a poll. It's about holding on to that belief consistently, even in the face of challenges, opposition, or changing circumstances. And I'm gonna tuck into that a lot more a little bit later in this episode, but I want to just break it down for you. If 50 to 60% of Texans say they support TEXIT today, that's encouraging. It's worth celebrating. It shows that the idea of Texas independence is gaining traction. But what about tomorrow? What happens when those supporters are faced with tough questions or fear-mongering from the opposition or with the practical realities of what TEXIT and self-government would mean? Will their support hold steady? Will it grow stronger, or will it waver? Well, that is the question. And that's where the concept of unshakable belief comes in. Answering yes on a poll or even in an election doesn't necessarily equate to having an unshakable belief. It's one thing to say you support TEXIT when it's theoretical, but it's another thing entirely to hold that belief when it's time to act on it, when it's time to vote, to advocate, or to stand firm in the face of resistance. You see, this is why we at the T&M focus so much on building a core group of Texans who have that unshakable belief. We catch a lot of flack sometimes about being very numbers driven, but understand it's about more than just numbers. It's about the depth of conviction. We need to ensure that the support for TEXIT isn't just broad, but deep, that it's rooted in a belief that can withstand any challenge. So definitely, when you see the polling numbers from that Survey USA poll, 60% of voters overall, 66% of likely voters, that's encouraging. As I said, it's reason to celebrate. But they don't mean that we have already hit the tipping point. It does mean that the sentiment, the prevailing sentiment, is in our favor. And if we were to have the vote on independence on that day, we would definitely win. I feel confident of that all the time, but we need to be absolutely certain. So the poll numbers show us that we're on the right path, but we need to keep pushing. We need to keep building. We need to keep deepening that belief across Texas. And only when we have achieved that level of unshakable belief can we truly say that we have reached the tipping point. So now that we've clarified where we stand and we have established that the real criteria in the tipping point theory is unshakable belief, let's dig a little bit deeper into what that means. We throw around that term unshakable belief quite a bit, but what does it really mean? And more importantly, what does it mean in the context of our movement for Texas independence? I mean, I get emails all the time, or I have people, look, I've believed in this my whole life, right? I have people come up and say 2 years ago, they joined the T&M and, I believe in this, and then all of a sudden circumstances change, and then they don't believe in it anymore. Well, I've changed my mind, right? The people I mentioned a moment ago that are back on Team Fed, right? That suddenly believe whatever hype is coming down the pipeline that somehow the federal government's going to be fixed, right? That's the kind of things that happen, and they say they believe it, but that's not an unshakable belief. When I was a kid, when I was a child, I believed in certain things, right? Like the tooth fairy, right? I'm sure I did. I don't really remember it, but I'm sure I did. I guess I was always confused about where the money under my pillow came from, but I no longer believed in that. Well, I didn't have an unshakable belief in the tooth fairy, right? So this is very different, as I said. Okay, so just to be clear, and not to be repetitive, but to underline this point, an unshakable belief is more than just a strong opinion, right? If you believe in something, it's very different than if you have an opinion on something. And let's face it, I'm on social media. A lot of people have a lot of opinions about a lot of things, and over time, those opinions change. I run into very few people that have what I would call an unshakable belief in pretty much anything, right? But it's more than just a strong opinion. It's a conviction that is so deeply ingrained in your person that it cannot be swayed by external pressures, doubts, or opposition. It's a belief that stands firm in the face of adversity, that persists even when the odds seem stacked against you. I mean, how many times have we run into people that are all in until their first engagement with the opposition, right? I am all in for Texas independence. I will do whatever. I will go wherever. I am so ingrained in this. I believe it so much until the first person hits them with a question that they can't answer, or somebody calls them a name on social media, or they get pounded on by somebody in their family, right? I mean, that's not an unshakable belief. But you have to understand, unshakable belief is kind of an interesting term, because the RPI study did not really give, in my opinion, again, not an unshakable belief, in my opinion, did not give a clear definition that can be applicable other than a person, that particular person was hit with circumstances and they did not change their belief. Okay. So, for us in our task, especially in dealing with tipping point theory and how it applies to what we're doing here with TEXIT, is to identify some criteria. How can you measure unshakable belief in practice? What does that look like practically in the fight for Texas independence? And I'm going to tell you, it really boils down to what we can observe, either personally in our own lives or externally, looking at a particular person and saying, does this person have an unshakable belief or not? And the first hallmark of unshakable belief is persistence, okay? When you believe in something so strongly that you don't give up on it just because the road is tough, that's persistence, right? And let's face it, the road to Texas independence is anything but easy and smooth. We've been advocating for TEXIT for years, facing down opposition from all sides, but we keep going because we know that this is the right path for Texas. Persistence means continuing to push for Texas independence no matter what challenges arise. And I'm recording this right at the anniversary of when I got involved in the fight for Texas independence back August 24th, 1996. And I'm going to tell you, if you want a reason to quit, if you don't have an unshakable belief, if you just have an opinion and you want a reason to not have to go out there and work for this, I can give you 1,000 of them, right? But persistence is one of the key hallmarks of an unshakable belief. You want to know if someone has an unshakable belief in Texas independence, see how persistent they are. I can tell you, it's been an interesting exercise in dealing with individuals all these years who profess to be believers in Texas independence, but then they chafe at having to be disciplined and having to show up and having to do things like make phone calls or be on phone calls. And they're like, well, I'm just, I'm going to leave. I'm going to do, I can't be under, I'm just going to do this my own way. And invariably, 6 months is typically the most amount of time that we see them. After 6 months, 6 months is generally tops, but typically within weeks or a few months, they disappear, right? And then they'll pop back up a few years later. I've been working for Texas independence this whole time I've been gone. It's like, really? What have you been doing? That's interesting because honestly, no one knows who you are, and no one could find you with a hunting dog and a Ouija board, right? So where have you been? You obviously haven't been persistent. So it does not feel like an unshakable belief to me. But second to persistence is resilience, right? Along with persistence, resilience is crucial. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from setbacks, to keep going even when things don't go your way, right? So we talked about persistence, which is that continuous push, right? That persistence, you just won't give up, you just won't quit. But resilience is when you have a setback or a perceived setback, and you just keep going, right? You bounce back from it. It's I get knocked down 6 times and stand up 7. In the fight for TEXIT, we face plenty of setbacks, from legal challenges to political pushback to censorship to media bias. You name it, right? But we never let those setbacks stop us. Personnel challenges, leadership challenges, campaigns that failed or didn't work out the way that we intended. But we never let those setbacks stop us. When you have an unshakable belief, you understand that setbacks are just part of the journey, right? And you're prepared to face them head on. Now, the third measure of unshakable belief is really a commitment to action. You see, an unshakable belief isn't something that you just hold in your heart, right? It's something that drives you to take action. And I have said this on more than one occasion, said it in speeches before, and I've talked about this in some trainings. And when people ask a lot of times about, just if for me to give them some advice in how to interact in this issue, I talk to them about having an action bias. I talk to them about how Texas nationalism is not a thing you do. It's a thing you are, because where if that's what you are, if that's at your core, it's going to drive you to take action. And so, to get scriptural, by your fruits you will know them, right? So if the tree is good, the fruit's good. And I can look at the fruit and tell you if a tree is healthy or not healthy. And that is exactly what this part of unshakable belief means. It's having that commitment to action. It's being driven by that unshakable belief. If you are perpetually in neutral, right, or you're a whole lot of running your mouth, but not a whole lot of getting your hands dirty and rolling up your sleeves and putting shoe leather on the pavement and doing the things that need to be done to make TEXIT a reality, then I got to wonder, do you have an unshakable belief? Whether it's engaging with legislators, participating in T&M events, or simply talking to your neighbors about TEXIT, your belief compels you to act. It's not enough to just believe in Texas independence. You have to be willing to work for it day in and day out. Now, we don't ask people to go out there and have to come up with things on their own. We have plenty of opportunities within the context of the organization where people can act. We have concrete ways that you can engage your neighbors and help us find other committed, dedicated supporters, to help us find others of unshakable belief. We make those opportunities available. Sometimes it may not be something you want to do, but let me tell you, all of the things in my personal life that I know, and professional life, a lot of those things that I know how to do, I did not know, but for the fact that I did them to advance the cause of Texas independence. I'm a perpetual student. I'm learning things every single day to help advance the cause of Texas independence, to develop new skills, to learn better ways to approach the public. I mean, I'm not going to go through all of the different things that I've had to teach myself to do, but I will give you an idea. If you were listening to or watching this podcast, this is one of them. I had no idea how to do any of this kind of stuff. Didn't know what kind of equipment to have. Didn't know how to structure a podcast. Didn't know how to handle lighting, and didn't know anything about how YouTube algorithms and channels worked or any of those things, right? But I had to learn. And so, that learning is part of having that action bias. And so, if you have an unshakable belief, it's going to manifest as a commitment to action. And we're going to see it, and not just a commitment to action, but following through with that commitment to action. The most telling sign of an unshakable belief is the willingness to make sacrifices for a cause, for that belief. And let's be honest, fighting for Texas independence often requires sacrifice, but I'm going to tell you something. Here's a little secret. Anything that is worthwhile in your life is going to require some sort of sacrifice. It's going to, and Texas independence is no different. It might mean giving up your time to volunteer for T&M events. It might mean contributing financially to support our efforts, or even standing up for TEXIT in situations where it's not popular. You may have to sacrifice some pride, right? You may have to sacrifice, you will have to sacrifice time, right? You're going to have to sacrifice something, because things that are worthwhile require sacrifice. Independence is achieved, it's not received. Something that Kara, my wife, is fond of saying. Independence is not going to be like manna falling on the children of Israel when they were in the wilderness. You're going to have to sacrifice things to make it happen. That may mean sacrificing some of your hobbies. It may mean sacrificing some of your time for things you'd like to do. I got to tell you, I scroll down through social media, and I see all these. I see a lot of people who have professed in the past that they are sold out to the cause, that they have, again, trying to indicate they have an unshakable belief. And I scroll down through, and I don't see them talking about TEXIT. Instead, I see them out there, they get to go on vacations, they get to go to the beach, they get to do all these other things. And I'm not begrudging anyone for doing that, right? I'm not saying that you have to get rid of those things and purge those things from your life. But what I'm saying is that you are going to have to sacrifice some things, right? I know it's been that way in my personal life, and I would love to see someone challenge me on whether or not I have an unshakable belief in this issue, right? And I'm not telling you have to, I'm not telling you you have to be like me, right? And just kind of give your entire life over to it. But if you have an unshakable belief, it's going to show in how you prioritize this in your life. I remember that story, that anecdote about, the guy bringing out the glass jar, and he talked about, all of the, how you prioritize things in your life, and says you start by putting the big rocks in the jar, not the little rocks. Well, is Texas independence one of your big rocks, or is it a pebble, right? Sacrifice is never easy, but when you believe in something as strongly as we believe in Texas independence, it's absolutely worth it. So I want you to take a moment and ask yourself, this is a question for you. Do you have an unshakable belief in Texas independence? Are you persistent in your advocacy? Are you resilient in the face of setbacks? Are you committed to taking action? Are you willing to make sacrifices for the cause? Well, if the answer is yes to all of those, then you're exactly the kind of person that we need to reach that tipping point. But remember, having an unshakable belief is just the beginning. It's what you do with that belief that matters. And so, with those questions, I do want to get personal for a moment, right? Because I think this is more about assessing ourselves than about assessing others. Now, we sort of have to in the scope of the organization, because we're looking at these things because we're having to measure our progress toward the tipping point, and we have to measure things like unshakable belief, right? And we have to break down this persistence, this resilience, this commitment to action, right? We have to do that. But I think for each of us, this is a personal question, right? How do you know if you truly have an unshakable belief in TEXIT? It's one thing to say you support Texas independence, but it's another to live it every single day. So let's go through some reflective questions. And as I ask them, I want you to think about your own commitment. Do you find yourself consistently advocating for Texas independence, even in challenging conversations? I know some of you out there do, right? It's easy to talk about TEXIT with like-minded people, but what about those tougher conversations with friends, family, or coworkers who might not share your views? Are you advocating for this? Are you being a champion for this? Do you have those difficult conversations and make those approaches and start conversations with strangers, or do you shy away from those discussions? Right? Or do you embrace them as opportunities to educate and persuade? Look, we're not asking you to go beat people over the head with it. But let's face it, the rest of the world is very comfortable talking about what they believe and don't believe, when we know for a fact that most of them are just holding opinions that are as fleeting as the parts of the dandelion that blow away, right? But for us, as people of an unshakable belief, we have to look at all of those as opportunities. And if they can advocate and talk about what they talk about, then why not us? It's one of the reasons that we get so upset when those of you that are out there doing this, get censored on social media, or when the media tries to paint you in a light that is not accurate to discredit what you were saying. That's why we fight so hard every single solitary day to continue to build the credibility of the movement and people like you that are in it. Okay? So ask yourself this: are you willing to invest your time, money, and energy into making TEXIT a reality? Look, we all have busy lives, and it can be absolutely tempting to sit back and let others do the heavy lifting. But if you have an unshakable belief, then you understand that your time and resources are essential to the cause. Are you showing up for events? Are you contributing to T&M's efforts in meaningful ways? Are you jamming your hand in the air to help volunteer? Right? Are you offering your skills to help advance the cause of TEXIT? So, ask yourself this one. Do you see TEXIT as essential to the future of Texas and not just a secondary option that's on the table? You see, for some, TEXIT is just one possibility among many. But for those with an unshakable belief, it's the only path forward. Every time I hear someone say, well, TEXIT is my plan B, I want to stick my finger down my throat and throw up, right? That is not an unshakable belief. That is someone who wants a backup plan. You know, it's not enough for them to see the rest of the world and the union crumbling down around them and seeing the debt at $35 trillion and, you know, the southern border with Mexico collapsed and neo-Marxists and Maoists in charge of Washington, D.C. That's obviously not enough. So that's their plan B. But people with an unshakable belief understand that TEXIT gaining its independence is the future of Texas, and it is essential, and it is urgent. It's not just some other thing to do. If you want something else to do because you want to, I don't know, feel good about yourself, go join the softball booster club, right? But if you want to be a part of a cause, if you see TEXIT as essential to the future of Texas, then there's one place you got to hang your hat. And you got to shove all your chips in the middle of the table. And you got to get behind the wheel. And you got to put your foot all the way down on the accelerator. And you got to go, 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 go. Because if you're not treating it that way, then you are saying that you don't feel that it's essential to the future of Texas. You don't feel a sense of urgency, right? So, look, you have to understand that Texas must be independent. Not just for the sake of its own people, but as a beacon of self-governance and freedom for others to follow. We're writing the future. We are creating it right now. And if you can understand that and articulate that, and if you fundamentally believe that, then congratulations. You probably are possessed of an unshakable belief. But if you're answering yes to these questions, then I'm here to tell you that you are on the right path. But let's just take it a step further, because all of us need encouragement from time to time, right? What can you do right now to strengthen your belief and make it truly unshakable? Maybe you're listening to this and going, look, I feel convicted. I understand what you're talking about here. You know, I'm not sure where I am on this, but I really would like to strengthen my belief to the point that it is unshakable. Well, then, number one is you need to educate yourself, right? If your belief is to the point where you can be shook, right? Then there are some things that you probably, some gaps you need to fill. And typically, those are knowledge gaps, right? The more you know, the stronger your belief will become. Dive deep into the issues around TEXIT, the legal issues, the economic issues, the social implications. You know, the good thing about it is the T&M website has a wealth of resources to help you get started. You know, there is no reason for people to say, look, I register my support for TEXIT, but I have a question about it. Look, we made it available, right, through the TEXIT book. You can go to texitnow.org and get those questions answered. If you're a member of the T&M, we have a resource library where we put academic papers and videos and all kinds of educational material there. Plus, you know, you're literally, one search away on your favorite search engine from a wealth of material. And a lot of material that's out there comes from people that are opposed to it. But let me tell you, iron sharpens iron. You know, being able to answer for those questions posed by the opposition or to rebut their arguments, at least in your own head and heart, is a key component of developing that unshakable belief. Okay? The second thing you can do is engage with others, right? Look, don't keep your belief to yourself. And I know I've talked a lot about how you should, not be afraid to push this, not push, but to engage others about this issue. But even beyond just sort of that outreach and connecting with unknown supporters of TEXIT, one of the things you got to do is engage with others that also have an unshakable belief, right? You've got to be around your fellow Texas nationalists. Look, there are no people in this world that I would rather spend time with than our people, because we can talk about these issues. We can, I feel so much better after I'm around our people. And that's because I can have conversations with them that I can't have with somebody who is fresh in this issue or just sort of inquiring about this issue. It's the concept of, you got to have milk before you can have meat, right? And that's kind of the thing. There are people out there that need those initial interactions and engagements, but for me, what strengthens my unshakable belief is being around others that have been impacted by the work that I've done because of that unshakable belief. Being around those people, having those conversations, building those relationships. You got to remember that the tipping point isn't just about having a majority. It's about having a committed, unshakable minority that can inspire the rest. And that starts by the people of unshakable belief inspiring and motivating one another. Okay, so don't forsake spending time. I know that there are a lot of people out there that may or may not feel like they need to attend meetings, but you will not have a better opportunity to strengthen your own belief and even learn more than connecting with others that are also of an unshakable belief in the issue of Texas independence. Which brings me to the third thing you can do, which is you can participate in T&M activities, right? I kind of teased that one, but look, I won't belabor the point because I really covered it. But the more active you are, the more you are going to strengthen your own belief and help others do the same. That they say a lot of times that the best way to learn a subject is to teach it, right? If you want to know something down to its roots, teach it to somebody else, and you wind up learning together. Well, that's kind of the way it is with what we do in the T&M, right? You are going to develop your unshakable belief by getting out there in the scrum, through volunteering, through putting it through action, by putting that unshakable belief on display. That's going to strengthen your belief more than anything else out there. And of course, finally, and not to belabor this point, but I think it does bear mentioning, if you want to really strengthen your unshakable belief, you got to do those things, right? You've got to be willing to sacrifice. You've got to dedicate time to volunteer. You've got to contribute financially. You've got to be willing to get up there in the tough situations and slog it out, right? But your willingness to sacrifice is a testament to the strength of your belief. And I would suggest for those of you that are just exploring that, look, just find one thing, and either deprioritize it and prioritize your work to make TEXIT happen, or start a $5 a month contribution if you're not a donor, right? $5. Go start a membership in the T&M, $4.21 a month. If you are not offering any type of sacrifice, then it always starts with one thing. Maybe you dedicate 10 minutes a day to posting on social media about TEXIT and find an article on the T&M website and share it. Those are all sacrifices of time. It doesn't have to be big. Like I said, you don't have to do what I do, but do something, okay? So, as we wrap up today's episode, I just want to leave you with this thought because, we talked about the tipping point, talked about this idea of unshakable belief, but I do want to leave you with this thought. Reaching the tipping point for Texas independence isn't just about numbers. It's about the strength and commitment of each individual Texan who believes in our cause. And your unshakable belief is a vital part of this journey. Every time you take action, every time you advocate for TEXIT, you are helping us get one step closer to making Texas independence a reality. So, if nothing else from today's episode, reflect on your commitment, strengthen your belief, and be prepared to make sacrifices. And let's work together to reach that tipping point where Texas independence is no longer a dream, but is our today reality. Okay? So, look, I want to thank you for tuning in. I know this is a little bit different speed for the Texas News Podcast for one of our episodes, but look, there's obviously something going on that said this episode needed to happen. These things needed to be said. And possibly it was some of the questions that came after the first TEXIT blueprint that we did up in Greenville, where I covered some tipping point, not in depth. I didn't cover truly unshakable belief to this depth. But it's important because I think everyone needs to understand the reality of where we are. I got to thinking just the other day, someone asked me, again, how long is it going to be until Texas becomes independent? And it's like, well, I will tell you that part of the reason that it's going so slow are the people that think it's supposed to happen super fast, right? But don't exhibit that unshakable belief. They burn bright and they flame out. That's a whole other lesson where we could talk about the attrition rate of the Texian army during the Texas Revolution, but that's not for today. But that is going to be the conclusion of our discussion about the tipping point and unshakable belief. So, again, thank you so much. I want to tell you how much I really appreciate each of you that are tuning into these episodes. Please, wherever you're listening to this or watching this, do all the things. Like it, subscribe, share, and, of course, at any time, we need your support. Head over to tnm.me/join and become a member today if you were not already a member. Show us that unshakable belief. And so until the next time, my friends, I will leave you with the words that I leave you with every time we're together. They're not my words. They're the words of Sam Houston when he said that Texas will again lift its head and stand among the nations. I believe that time is now, and the question is, will you stand with her?